Jake
Hey,
Baird,
Andrew Jones.
how we doing?
Outstanding. How you doing?
Oh man, it's finally starting to get warm in the pleasant state of Utah, which means it's going to get warm for you. So,
Oh, it's been warm. Although
oh,
today we did have a pullback, so it's been up in the 90s. Today it's been in the mid to low 70s. And we got
really?
a
Oh.
little bit of rain last night.
Yeah, we got a lot of rain the last 2 days, which was hilarious because I thought it'd be really cool to drive my motorcycle in the rain. Which if it's not raining a whole lot, it's fine. But if it's raining a whole hell of a lot, you just get completely soaked. Jeans, jacket.
So did you
Uh,
really think that would be cool, or were you just not thinking about it at all?
no, at this point, it's like the vanity part is gone. So I needed to get somewhere. So I pull it out of the garage and then I get on it and I start riding and I'm like, oh, what an idiot. But then you're like, I need to commit. And then you commit for like another couple of miles and then you're like, this was dumb. This was stupid. But I always think it could be worse. I could have bought like some sports car and been like 40 grand deep, which thank God I didn't do that. A motorcycle is much more cost effective at the quarter life crisis, which is
Is that what
funny.
is that what was going on in Quarter Life Crisis?
Oh God, buying a motorcycle? Hell yeah, it is. Which is hilarious. I mean, do you have a quarter life crisis going on? I feel like this is a new thing now. I mean, we'll probably live to our 80s, 90s, and maybe even our hundreds. So, I mean, are you going through one, Jake, or have you gone through one? I mean, the
The entire
motorcycle.
the entire last year has been a quarter life crisis.
But I mean, you haven't made any big like purchases though. You haven't like bought
Quite the
something.
opposite. I sold my house. There's going to be some purchases coming. I can assure you of that. I'll let you know as soon as they're done. I'm probably going to buy a new truck. I'm going to buy probably not. Maybe I'm thinking about a dirt bike. I don't know if I'm going to get a street bike, but a dirt bike,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a side by side, would be cool, and then like a
Oh
travel
yeah.
trailer.
That would actually be pretty dope. I mean, as far as all of those purchases, if you were to be like, this particular purchase is my quarter life crisis, what would it be out of all of those? What would you bowl out the most on, is what I'm asking.
The truck.
This,
I've been pricing out new trucks, and it's up there.
diesel engine, right?
Mega cab, Ram.
Mega cab for the dogs
Mm-hmm.
and the cats, whenever you need to travel with them.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I would, if I were you. I mean, I pulled out on my first truck for sure. Well, my
You
second
what?
truck.
You did what with this second truck?
I balled out. I went, I bought a brand new Silverado. What was it? It's the F-150 equivalent, the 1500,
Mm-hmm.
a couple of years ago. Brand new. I thought it was cool, but, I didn't really have any real singular purpose for that. And that's one thing I wanted to talk about, which was if you're going to buy a truck, right, have it make sure that you're going to serve some kind of purpose for it, which I didn't, but you will, right? Travel trailer, dirt bike, and obviously the whole cadre of dogs. When I bought my truck, it was literally me. I wasn't hauling anything. I hauled maybe one, like a U-Haul trailer once, and then a whole cadre of shit, and that was it. And then I was just like,
We grew up in a truck culture, so it was just like that's what you thought you do is if you want a car, you go buy a truck.
that's right. It's like, hey, you know what? It's totally normal to get 15 miles a gallon, which I actually, my truck, the Chevy's got like 20 miles a gallon on the highway, but then, some
I always go from stopped to 10, 15, 20 miles an hour over the speed limit in as short a period of time as possible. So
Mhm.
I do not get great gas mileage, and my truck has the Hemi in it, so
Mm.
it's expensive.
Oh God, yeah. Especially now. I really haven't commuted much. I mean, at all since the pandemic hit. But you have commuted. What was the price last year around this time compared to this year? Wasn't it like
I feel like it was $1 less, like right around the low twos to high $1. So like anywhere between the $1.80 range up to the 2.20 range. I don't remember specifically, but it was about there. And then like a couple months ago, they just shot up to like 310, and they've been hovering there a little bit. I went to Colorado and I saw the gas prices, and it was like 20 cents cheaper than here. And I was like, what is up with that? Why is it cheaper there? But if you go to Colorado, the lowest price they show is E85 fuel.
No,
Yeah.
really. And your truck doesn't take E85, right?
I use 87.
Oh,
But
you
it's
use
like they've got
that's right,
85,
the octane.
they've got 85, 88, and 91 there. It's really weird.
Yeah, same here in Utah. 85, 88, and 91. And no, actually, it's 85, 87, 91. What is it in Arizona? I forget. Is it the same?
87, 89, and 91.
It must be the octane. The higher it gets, it works better in, I guess, more warmer climates. I don't. I don't know. Speaking of which, I wanted to ask you. I had this thought this last week, which was energy production, and relying. If we were to go ahead, climate change, not just climate change, but also just the power plants that are more efficient. I watched this video on nuclear power and how many lives that nuclear power has taken. And I know we've talked about this in the past, right? But I wanted to bring it up one more time and talk about this new kind of power plant that's coming out, which is much safer, definitely not as screwed up as like Fukushima, and definitely not as screwed up as Chernobyl. I mean, what do you think about nuclear power replacing everything until we go from fission to fusion, and then whatever else comes after that?
I like it. Like I've talked about before, it seems from what I've read, nuclear power in and of itself is very clean and highly efficient and comes with the least problems. Where it has become problematic in the past was storing the nuclear waste, which we are not really addressing in a lot of areas right now. It's just leaking into neighborhoods and communities that we're just kind of ignoring and putting little band-aids on. That
True.
kind of stuff needs to be addressed, certainly. And then obviously there's Chernobyl, and that kind of stuff is just highly unlikely to happen, especially with how the world works currently. It's a matter and then there's the where there's like things like earthquakes and tsunamis and what happened in Fukushima. So there are risks, certainly, with, at this point I would say it's more unplanned for natural disasters, but it seems like we've really got most of the kinks worked out of nuclear power. We're storing it, the nuclear waste, much better. But it's just a matter of going back and addressing our failures from previous generations of nuclear power plants.
One thing I also want to bring up was in this particular video, talking about the economics of nuclear fission in a power plant. Like, if I were a power company, I wanted to go ahead and build a nuclear power plant versus a natural gas power plant. Like, when do I make my return on investment? And one thing I didn't really know about nuclear power is the fuel itself is extremely cheap, but building the facility with the proper staff, it takes a lot longer to go ahead and pay off that loan. But if you were to effectively build, let's say, 20 new facilities in the United States, it would make just as much as some natural gas power plants. But as a natural gas power plant, you could go ahead and start making a profit after year 4. For a nuclear power plant, it's year 20. But then, the 20 to 40 year lifespan after that is just astronomically more than natural gas. So,
Oh yeah.
one thing, and I know this has kind of been a trend in our previous talks, was just humans not living that long and being able to see the long term. And that was one of the things that got me thinking, a 20-year natural gas power plant making money versus a 40-year nuclear power plant making money. It's not really that long, but for us, it's long. So I mean, it's not really like a question posed to you, but more of a. It seems like as we continue to live longer, these kind of like longer thought out thought processes will kind of become more natural to us than they are now, even if it is an economic one, right? 20 versus 40 years economics is going to make a lot more sense than 20-year economics, which might have been a long
So
time before.
yeah, so kind of to touch upon that, I'm not a fan of central planning at all. I don't think there should be a central authority just deciding what type of power we should use. I think whatever is best should naturally be free to kind of to earn its place as the the supreme source of power, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm always hesitant to allow any kind of a group or centralized authority to make those decisions, and I think that's where we're at right now, and especially if we were just kind of let centralized authority step out of the way, nuclear power would come in and start taking over the market for power.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there'd probably be solar at this point is really stepping up, but
Yeah.
everything is just so heavily subsidized and controlled, and there's really no room for something newer and better to come along and essentially be created. If someone were to
Yeah.
create a real, true competitor to solar power, to nuclear power, to actually just create
Mm-hmm.
like true, like let's say free energy, they've found a way to just truly create free energy.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way that would be allowed to be introduced into society because there's just so much special interest protecting the natural gas, coal, solar industry, wind industry, and the nuclear industry. There's just
Mm-hmm.
so much legislation that goes into making these sources
Mm-hmm.
into creating them and making them function and bringing them about that it would be dead on arrival, dead in its tracks, and there's no way any governing authority or any regulatory bureaucracy would allow it to happen. And
What do
that's
you?
kind of what the problem we're seeing, especially with the Green New Deal and the progressives who all want to talk about like the cows and what they're doing
Yeah.
and
The
they're not a fan of
methane.
nuclear energy. They want to ban airplanes, make people travel on trains everywhere, ban cars.
Yeah.
It's people should not be in a position to make these kinds of decisions. And if we said, hey, you can't make this decision. You're not qualified to make this decision. The AOC, she is not qualified to have any of these opinions on the things she talks about.
Mm-hmm.
And she gets to be a voice of authority and make these bills that have a very real shot of becoming laws that affect all of us,
Well,
that
that's
make it
a.
more expensive for us to live, that don't actually help the environment. They don't help stop greenhouse gas emissions. It's just really more shit that makes the rich richer.
Well, I mean, that's a funny thing to bring up is the republic kind of, congressional political system that we have now, right? And this is one thing I've been toying in my head for a very long time is if I were to be elected, let's say congressman or a senator, I think we're at the point where you can almost have a pseudo direct democracy into a republic. So what that means is if I were a senator or a congressman, I could go ahead and create like some sort of phone app that's like, hey, I'm voting on this issue. Here's a couple of videos of it, of not just me, but also the opposition voicing what they think about this particular issue. How should I vote? Yes or no? Or, well, I guess absentia. I mean, you wouldn't even show up, right? But I think I think the republic should be better served that way rather than actually, voting in somebody that you just kind of give your faith to. Which I mean, we did in the past, but we have the technology now where it's like I can immediately vote in what I think I want to actually vote in, which could kind of bring in that kind of voter fraud. But if that voter fraud wasn't real in that particular society, I mean, would you still like a republic? Because I mean, the Republican model now doesn't seem like anybody likes it. I think.
Well, yeah, but that's just because we were not only a republic, we were a constitutional republic. There were strict limits on what the government could or couldn't do, and they've eroded all of that. So it's my theory that whatever the government can do, it will do. Whatever,
Yeah.
it's just going to grow. It's this monster that's just going to grow and grow and grow, and whatever restraints we put on it, it's not going to be it's not going to stop it. It may temporarily hold it off or slow it, but look at where we're at now. I mean, it's free reign for the government to do whatever it wants all the time. And people are getting murdered and thrown in prison and forced to die, and it's horrifying. And the founders were very against the direct democracy because people are fucking stupid, and the opinion of one person over here should not affect the way that the person over here lives their life. You know, they were about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And
True.
basically, as long as you're living your life how you want to and you're not harming another person, you should be free to. I think the fewer people who have any decision in say in what in any kind of laws or anything like that, the better. We certainly do have the technology to, with blockchain, to keep to make it so that a direct democracy kind of model would be possible without any real risk of voter fraud. But again, we've got the ability to do that with actual elections, and we're just not seeing it done. The people who, you know, you saw people who were crying about potential voter fraud and voter suppression and everything for the last 2 years, and then when we've seen actual evidence of that happen this year, they're nowhere to be found. They don't care. Whereas we could end all doubts about elections if we just introduce blockchain. But I think it's because elections don't actually matter that they won't introduce these into them at all.
Yeah, I mean if there's one thing we could definitely agree on is that kind of like blockchain method of like having every single voter have their kind of own ID. Well, I mean obviously, and then how the blockchain works, we would be able to go ahead and kind of securitize that. Which is another thing I've been thinking about is, will the blockchain ever be, cracked? Is there ever going to be a way?
They say with quantum computing it could be cracked, but we're theoretically a ways away from that, and they say that blockchain will develop naturally to offset the risk of that coming from quantum computing.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. The thing about that is, quantum computing creating a brute force kind of like a processor that will go ahead and, unlock one chain, right? Well, that's like robbing one person, and it's kind of random too. You would only rob that one person and not the entire chain. Like the entire kind of crypto economy wouldn't just fall apart if we were to go ahead and, unlock the blockchain. That's like me robbing you only. There's still 7 billion people out there. So even if that were a thing, I don't think it would totally eradicate cryptocurrency, which Dogecoin is doing phenomenally. Which is one thing I wanted to talk about. You have Ripple, right? I mean, you're a big believer in Ripple.
Yes, so technically it's XRP. Ripple is the company. XRP is the crypto.
Okay.
I don't really care. That's just like people hear that and they get neurotic about it.
Well, what's the difference? I as a layman as myself, like what's the difference between, so you have Ripple, the company, and then XRP, the actual currency is what it's called? Mm-hmm. But it's the same kind of concept as like Ethereum, Litecoin, Bitcoin, Dogecoin.
Not exactly. I mean, it's hard to get like really in depth into what they do. XRP is basically being used by the company Ripple as a bridge currency. So Ripple wants to basically digitize every asset on the planet. So every piece of real estate, every bond, every stock, every ounce of gold is going to have a token in the digital economy that's represented. And what they want to use XRP for is a decentralized bridge asset. So if you want to send an ounce of gold, sell an ounce of gold for US dollars, fiat currency, they'll send the gold token through XRP, and then it'll come out as USD on the other end. So they could do it from dollars to real estate, from currency to different currency, and that's kind of what their goal is. You know, the CEO of Ripple has talked about how the quickest way to send money to China right now is to put it in a suitcase and fly it there.
That's wild.
Yeah, so it's I'm really bullish on that aspect. Again, like the SEC is going to lose their case against Ripple.
Yeah.
And then once that happens and it gets relisted on the bigger exchanges, it's going to take off.
I honestly think after this last bullish run of all cryptocurrencies, that the USD and all currencies across the world will eventually become some sort of like digitization. I don't think we'll be printing currency. I mean, we'll still print currency for economic easing, but I think it'll all become. I think it'll just cycle. I mean, humans cycle, right? We're on the gold standard, then we went off of it. I think we're going to get on some sort of like Bitcoin standard and then get off of it again. But it won't be Bitcoin. It'll probably be some federally mandated run program.
So I think there is a systematic attempt to actually destroy the dollar and bring in the new digital currency. When you look at the first stimulus bill that came out in last year, during the earlier days of the pandemic, the page one, paragraph one of the stimulus bill, written by Maxine Waters, said that every American had been assigned a digital wallet and that the stimulus payments were going to be sent through that wallet into our bank accounts. That digital wallet was going to hold essentially the Federal Reserve digital currency, the blockchain, the Federal Reserve's blockchain currency. Really? So it's been created. We know it's been created because of that bill. They're just waiting to implement it, and they got so much backlash because of just the nature of mistrust of the government right now and the Fed that they pulled it out of that bill. I don't think they were expecting the backlash they got. So it's going to be interesting to see how they end up rolling that out eventually.
I think the changes of, like a physical currency going to like a Bitcoin or like some sort of blockchain currency that you're talking about is going to be just as momentous as going from the bartering system to coinage, in the ancient kind of, 8,000, 5,000, probably 8,000 years ago, just kind of talking about like that kind of change between bartering and coinage is going to be the same thing. And the reason I say that is because you're going to be able to track transactions, all over the place. You're going to be able to track all transactions, which is another good thing to bring up, right? We talked about how cryptocurrency is kind of the least sustainable thing to do. Like it costs more energy to have a cryptocurrency transaction, like a Bitcoin transaction.
Well, just as far as Bitcoin goes, yeah, that's true.
But, one of the things I like to think about with that kind of transaction is, okay, but, even computing power is, it doubles every year, right? So, and also efficiency. I don't know what the difference is in efficiency, but I would imagine that transaction is going to be minuscule in the future compared to like a, physical transaction between you and I think it'll be extremely small, and everyone's going to have their phones, and they're going to be using that rather than credit cards in the future.
I don't know if it's going to come directly from Bitcoin, but there's going to be blockchain coins and currencies and tokens that will be more efficient. There already are, right? XRP is one that you can use to send value instantly and very cheaply.
Yeah.
And I think it's just going to keep getting better and better, especially with the advancement in technology. But so back to like jumping from physical fiat to digital.
Yeah.
I think there's a clear agenda. Like last year, they say there was a coin shortage, and they started kind of siphoning coins out of the economy.
Okay.
I think at some point you're going to see that with cash, or if they don't, they might not even need to, because there's so much heavy money printing right now. You see people talking about hyperinflation happening soon, and then the mainstream narrative is, no, that's not going to happen. That can't happen here. The Federal Reserve knows what they're doing. which is not true, right? Like it can and it will happen.
Yeah.
And once that happens, that's when they're going to make the leap. And the people who win during that transaction are the ones who are buying gold and silver right now and buying crypto or land or something to kind of
Yeah.
to
To actually
transcend
show.
from this system into the next one.
Yeah.
And so that's what I think is going to happen.
Well, I mean, additionally to that, just the amount of hyperinflation that we're going to receive here in the next 5 to 10 years, at least at the USD, right? With all the extra money printing. I mean, I don't think we've ever printed as much money as we did in the last 2 years, or even the last year, as we did in the last like 50 years. Um, just an insane amount of cash being influx into the economy. The stimulus bills too, right? That obviously didn't help. But being able to kind of see, the individuals that'll kind of, do well from this aren't the ones that are holding on to this cash, but like you said, land, assets, cryptocurrencies, gold, silver, kind of the physical assets. I mean, they should all kind of convert it right now, which we're doing, and I think everybody should do.
Mm-hmm. Trump had a nominee to get to appoint to the Federal Reserve Board that was just no one wanted to appoint her. She wanted to integrate both gold and crypto into our financial system.
Yeah.
I don't know how specific she had gotten with that, but if she would have been able to get on the board and start trying to make that happen, like it really could have solved a lot of problems, especially with regards to the crashing dollar. But of course, like Republicans and Democrats aren't vote for that because you can't manipulate the money supply. You can't steal people's value through inflation. You can't print into oblivion. On a gold standard, you have to sell gold. You can't run a deficit. You have to sell gold to make. That's why FDR stole people's gold during the Great Depression, so that he could steal it, sell it, raise capital, so he could let the government do whatever tyrannical bullshit it wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
So,
one thing to kind of think about too is, as far as like FDR is concerned, which was the just amount of panic the Great Depression caused, and I almost feel like that depression was obviously worse than the pandemic. I mean, I don't think anybody would argue with that. But just talking about how a panic like that could go ahead and kind of change everyone's mind, like in an instant, right? Shit goes awire, like let's have the federal government go ahead and tell us what to do, and even state and county-run governments. And being like, in order for me to do what I need to do, I need to go ahead and listen to the government in order to tell me what to do. Which, in the Great Depression kind of made sense because you'd get a job. And maybe even during this pandemic, but I mean, I just, panic-induced politics really kind of scares me, honestly. Pandemic, the Great Depression, 9/11, right? With, what's that bill that ran right after?
Patriot Act?
Yeah, Patriot Act, yes. And it's almost like every politician's kind of like wet dream is if we really want to move legislation, like real big legislation, we need panic. Which, if I were a politician, would I think, am I artificially creating this? And this is me putting on my tinfoil hat, right? Are these things being artificially created? And then that kind of makes me think of like a much larger world kind of council too. What do you think about that? Like an Illuminati type. You think that's real?
Yeah, for sure. I doubt it's the actual, like it's called the Illuminati, but there's definitely organizations that run the world, and there's different tiers of it. The people who are actually running things, we don't really even know that they exist. We talk about like the billionaires, the richest billionaires, and I'm certain there's already trillionaires who are just paying not to be on the world's richest list.
Yeah.
But to talk about the Patriot Act and like all those kinds of bills, they were written before these events happened, and they were just waiting to capitalize on these events. There's so many politicians who talked about not letting crisis go to waste, and George Bush and Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, all those guys were planning the war in Iraq and Afghanistan and kind of this whole takeover of the Middle East. and
Yeah.
they were just waiting for something to come along and happen, and 9/11 was it. And there's plenty of evidence that
Mm-hmm.
9/11, I don't want to get too conspiratorial here, that at the very least they let 9/11 happen because there's just so much incompetence going on that day to believe that it's a coincidence.
I
There's
think
so much.
I think just to like make individuals not kind of think this one track mind of like this is a conspiracy, you guys are crazy, is to take other examples that are similar. Like I was watching a video on the Soviet war in Afghanistan in 1979, right? You might think to yourself like, okay, you had this kind of democratically run Soviet state that was going to be taken over by an Islamic state. So of course the Soviets went in and tried to help them out. I mean, that's not the whole story. The whole story is they wanted to go ahead and take control of Afghanistan because they were worried about any type of democratic incursion into the state. So it's when you hear something like that that happened, 40 or 50 years ago versus 9/11 that only happened, I guess, 20 years ago. I guess it'd be 20 years this year. Um, it's kind of like that kind of conspiracy could definitely happen. And one thing talking about that kind of plot in Afghanistan for the Soviet Union is they actually murdered the democratically Soviet dictator to install their own dictator that they can go ahead and control. So I honestly think that a lot of that stuff could be true.
Oh yeah, I mean the world is full of false flag events. The CIA was planning to even blow up a passenger jet during the JFK days. And JFK found out about it and axed the plan. But just the fact that they were planning that to stage an invasion of Cuba,
Yeah.
I cannot remember what the name of the operation was. I'll have to look that up. But there's also the operation for the CIA to infiltrate news media organizations to essentially propagandize the nation, which is certainly going on to this day.
Oh God, are you kidding me? I mean, I went to a journalistic school. They pay journalists like when you first come out of college and actually into the workforce, they pay you nothing. So if somebody were to come to me and be like, "I will pay you $2,000 to write this story for your local news media, like Arizona, Texas, wherever," I'd be like, "Oh hell yeah!" It's like my next 2 or 3 paychecks combined. And I think, as far as like intelligence kind of operations go, that's probably one of the best things to do. Isn't obviously killing people, but taking somebody that's low on the totem pole and just paying them a ton of money and being like, "This is what we want done. Can you do it?" Yeah. Okay, well, we're just going to go ahead and feed you this small amount of money in order to get where we're going.
Well, it's beyond that now. They don't even have to start with the low people in the totem pole. They're putting former defense and intelligence officials into actual positions of employment in the big media organizations.
Yeah, you can definitely see that. I never worked at an organization like that where you can kind of blatantly see that. But you can definitely, like, the one thing that really made me not want to pursue journalism when I was in school was the story. I don't know if it was NPR or AP. It was the Associated Press, and it was John McCain sells munitions and arms to Libya. It's like 10 years ago, right, when Libya was still, headed by Gaddafi. And I was like, oh, that's kind of crazy. I didn't know that. And then I read the story, and about 5 or 6 paragraphs down, it's like C-130 aircraft. And I'm like, a C-130 aircraft is a weapon? What? So it's just blatant shit like that, where it could be true. It is true, but most people aren't going to read past the first headline or paragraph.
And I think that's the thing I liked most about Trump's presidency was he really opened people's eyes to that. And just the way they would try and slander him and criticize him for things that just weren't valid, trying to paint him as racist, sexist, homophobic, bigoted, like all these different whatever buzzwords that they could to try and discredit him.
Yeah.
Not to say he doesn't have his own issues, but the press didn't talk about his legitimate issues. They made up the ones they wanted to try and control a narrative, because the legitimate issues he had, their fucking candidates are doing the same things.
Well, you just always follow the money, and if the money is backing a different organization than Donald Trump, then of course you're going to go ahead and lose that in the media war. I mean, one thing that I like to tell individuals, friends of mine, is watch SNL and all the jokes they make of Disney, and then just watch any kind of like ABC program, especially particularly the news. You won't hear anything bad against Disney, the parent company, because Disney owns ABC, and then NBC is their kind of big rival. So I don't know. I think that's always the idea, is to follow the money. Where's the money going? Who's it being backed by? And even then, that's where you get the tinfoil hat, and you're like, who are these people backed by? So back to like the World Council or whatever, right? Who are they made up of? And what are they trying to achieve?
Basically, pretty much a one world government. Like that's their agenda. They want strict authoritarian control of the entire planet.
Like an imperium?
Since the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, and even before, but that was the first major success they had. Not in this country, at least, right? They had success all around the globe prior to that, but
yeah.
At that point, that was the beginning of the takeover of this country, and essentially selling out our rights and liberties that this country was founded on to unelected bureaucrats in other countries who. I mean, the UN, basically, right? That's the cover screen for the one world government to an extent. And then they've got these organizations. They got the Bilderberg Group and the Council on Foreign Relations. And these people come together and discuss what their agenda is for the world for the next year.
I think...
So it's always about, like, the elite, like Bill Gates and so people like Elon Musk and he fascinates me. I don't know what his deal is or what his thing is, but he seems to be going against the grain and not really going with that whole thing. And then like the nationalistic, Buddy kind of alluded to this last time, the kind of nationalistic countries like Russia, they're not really on board with this. And then you look at like the countries we've invaded. Iraq was not cooperating. Iran's not cooperating. North Korea's not cooperating. Libya, Syria. I might be forgetting one more in there, but there was a systematic effort to come in and destabilize these countries, take them over, put a huge presence there, spread democracy or whatever the term was that we do, and then kind of start to expand through the Middle East, and then I'm not sure if China seems to be on board with it, right? They're part of that whole, like, China is the model for what they want for the globe.
Yeah.
Just strict surveillance state, social credit system. Every transaction is monitored. Censorship. I mean, like you see the censorship agenda really starting to get aggressive now. That's kind of what they want, is a China style society for the entire globe.
No, I mean, that's super interesting. One thing when it kind of comes to that is I always like to run the scenario in my head. The One World Council, right? And the history of it. And it starts to kind of make sense, where it's like, okay, you had, from the Dark Ages to the Medieval Ages, you had these giant oligarchies where people were kind of like marrying into the rich families, Kingdom of England or Scotland or, the Holy Roman Empire and etc. And of course, you still have those kind of royal families today, but if I were to kind of pinpoint this and say, where did this start and how did this become even a thing in the first place? I mean, all these even warring nations against each other might be cousins to each other. So I feel like this kind of One World Council definitely could be a thing. It's just like a natural not revolution, but evolution of that. But now it's kind of gone more underground, and that's probably a good thing, right? They don't want to be known. They don't want to be known as the king of Iran or Iraq or India. They want to be not super known. And then they can use even puppet heads. Maybe Elon Musk.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So
Well, I'm thinking more.
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're fine.
No, go. So, so yeah, definitely. There's people. The people who are really running things. They're underground. We don't know who they are to an extent. Like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers for sure.
Yeah.
But there's other ones who are really keeping a low profile, and then they get us to focus on like the Barack Obamas and the Hillary Clintons and the George Bushes and like the political elite
Yeah.
that don't really run shit. But they're just such invasive little parasites that they're the ones we have to focus on because they're the ones who are publicly pushing these agendas through this government and through the world that we have to live with.
So do you think it's like the one world government up here, right at the very top, and then they're just puppeteering the politicians, which then it really conspiratorial, which is, are these kind of, when do they get their claws into a particular politician? So when
you look at, this is where it gets interesting, right? Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It seems likely that with everything we've seen, he was working with other countries and the high-ranking intelligence officials in this country. He would bring celebrities and politicians to this island that he owned, and then essentially get them to have sex with children, underage women, boys even, and then blackmail them using that. And that's how they got their claws into these people. And that's not like, this is well established. I mean, where the fuck is Ghislaine Maxwell? Where is she?
Yeah.
Why aren't we hearing about that?
Which is funny because apparently her dad was a high-ranking politician in Great Britain. I didn't know this.
Yeah, he had some connections to a lot of shady shit. I think even Israel, and there's a woman named Whitney Webb who's done a lot of really good work into Jeffrey Epstein and that whole family. And Bill Barr, who was Trump's attorney general that he brought in after I think he fired Jeff Sessions to help him get through the Russiagate shit.
Yeah.
Bill Barr's father hired Jeffrey Epstein at the university he first got a job at.
Really?
Yeah, so it's like the whole thing is super shady. You know, then you've got like, I'm convinced that the world and this country are run by pedophiles, right? There's just, the church was but it's the big distraction, right? We know Hollywood and we know the political elite. They're fucking little kids. And it's disturbing. And no one seems interested in really looking into this story. Anyone who does ends up dead. And so, like, we've got plenty of evidence to at least look into this and see what the fuck is going on. A former Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, he was, I don't remember what the specific charge was, but it was something to do with child molestation. And he was a serial child predator. And former Speaker of the House, and no one talks about this. No one. No one talks about Jeffrey Epstein's connections to, they want to talk about either his connections to Bill Clinton or Donald Trump, depending on what side you're on, but like his connections to all these celebrities and all these other politicians, and it's the connections are so disturbing given what we know about Jeffrey Epstein and what he's been doing and has a history of doing, and now Ghislaine Maxwell, and
it's just odd.
Yeah.
It's just like you look at it and you go, is there some sort of trend going on, right? And, which is particularly disturbing. And I mean, the Catholic Church has been the Catholic Church for, what is it, 1,500 years as an institution, not only in this country, only in this country for a couple hundred years. But, you know, for a group of journalists in Boston to find out, hey, these priests were like, you know, fucking little kids and, you know, even boys, what's to say that, you know, the last 1,300 years before then, or 1,200 years, you know, in England, they weren't doing that. So your idea of it being run by pedophiles isn't horrifyingly, like, misjudged, because we had literal government systems that did the same thing, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. And that's the thing, that whenever there's like a current kind of present day debate, is to be like, humans are cyclical. We kind of do the same thing, but, you know, in other areas. So how can we look at a current event and replicate that, 20 years ago or 40 years ago or 100, 1,000 years ago? We're still doing the same fucking thing. And we're not really going to break the cycle until we either change our genetics or add in some sort of cybernetic connections to us. Long
Also,
tangent, but
you think about how powerful and big our government has gotten and how invasive it's become in people's lives to the point that they're literally just killing people for not complying with completely unreasonable demands, throwing them in prison for God knows the
what?
most minor of infractions.
Yeah.
What kind of person is attracted to become an elected official in this type of government who doesn't want to dismantle it but actually wants to grow and expand it? Like that kind of mindset is the type of person who wants to have sex with a helpless little kid, right? There's just something wrong with the wiring in the brain, and that's I think what's going on. It's obviously not all politicians, right? But there's, for whatever reason, there's like that kind of person that is attracted to that position of power and ruling over others is like it's got some issues and needs to exert control
Oh,
in
yeah.
other ways.
No,
And
I think
that's
I think that's fascinating. I mean, you kind of see that now. So the idea here is, I think we talk about this almost every time, but what is the new form of government? Because you have like the Chinese Soviet capitalistic kind of government, which is highly repressive. Totally fine with putting people in concentration camps, but reservations were kind of the same thing 150 years ago. Um, but they're really good at long term thinking. And then you have more of the democratic, capitalistic, socialist government, which we have, which isn't as long term as the Soviet Capitalistic Republic of China. But, if you make one decision that's bad, it's like 20 years of decision. I mean, look at that Great Green Wall. I don't know if you've heard of this, but trying to plant trees, to stop the Gobi Desert from going into China. That was a stupid fucking idea. One child policy, that was fucking dumb. Um, I mean, what's the meld between the two? I don't know. I don't know what government
so
is.
to me the ultimate, like the only thing I could get behind if we were to have a government is like a truly capitalistic society where we value freedom and businesses can do what they want, people can do what they want. There's no, as long as you're staying in your lane, you live your life the way you want, you don't affect other people, you don't harm other people, rather say, then we can have some kind of safety net to make sure that more underprivileged people are taken care of. But we've moved into this area where we try and do that, and the government just expands, and you give them an inch and they take a mile, and they keep going and become more and more invasive. They take more and more of your money to try and help these people over here and redistribute the wealth. And then next thing you know, people dying of cancer cannot take experimental treatment, and you're getting thrown in prison for smoking weed and serving life sentences for selling cocaine,
Yeah.
and it's crazy. And
No.
that's where we're at now, and it can't be, government cannot be controlled or constrained. It's always going to grow, and it's never going to act in your interest. It's always going to act in the interest of its own growth or the people in the positions of power.
Yeah. No. And
And
that's.
the corporations that are actually running the government, or whatever the progressives want to say, they couldn't get there without the Bernie Sanders and the Hillary Clintons and the Barack Obamas and the Republicans too, who are doing the Mitch McConnells, the rhinos,
Yeah.
who are who basically are status as well, and they all expand the power of government to inflict harm and erode our rights.
So if we were to have some sort of, if we were to get rid of this, right, and in that kind of capitalistic society, I feel like you'd have like one kind of mega corporation kind of take over, or at least a handful of them. But then every 10 to 20 years, you would be able to go ahead and kind of change the mega corporation leadership into a different mega corporation, almost like we see now. But obviously, that has no political repercussions. And I'm kind of just bringing this up as a scenario if there was no government, but there was more of a government created by a corporation. And what would that look like? I think you still see churn too, but I don't like you'll have like Standard Oil, and I don't know. Just to kind of highlight your point of what is the better political model. I
Well, that's
don't
the thing
know.
where decentralization comes into play, because whether it's a government that's created by people or a corporation, a government created by a corporation cannot sustain. If we've got one central authority that's just ruling over people, and we're seeing less and less authority from the states and local governments, and it's all going to the federal power, we're talking about defunding the police. And I think what we're going to see could happen is defunding local police and a federal police force, that a woke police that that's what it seems like we're going. But what the hell was I talking about? So with decentralization of power. So I think ideally you would have government that's as local as possible. So if in my neighborhood, right, wanted to get together and create an HOA that essentially created laws that affected just our neighborhood, if I didn't like it, I could sell my house and move to the next neighborhood over. We voluntarily created a government. I don't want to do it, so I'm going to go to the next neighborhood over where there's no government. And that's the next best thing. I don't like this town where they're creating this government and laws I don't like, so I'm going to go to the next town over with better laws. But the problem becomes where a centralized authority over a large area, people don't have choices to escape or go where they want, to live the life they want, the way they want, without inflicting harm on others. And that's the issue, is that people just think they know how to manage others' lives better than they do. And they don't, and they never will. And that's where we get to the problems we have now.
I think to kind of round this out, right? Um, I know it's been almost an hour, but to kind of round this out, I want to go ahead and kind of think about this. You know, if we look at humanity in real major change, right? Not particularly caused by humans themselves, but really by disease. You know, historically speaking, the bubonic plague, right? Changing the way that peasants become like actual citizens of the government and getting rid of feudalism. I think even just this pandemic, what you're talking about, right? People going into, you know, middle of nowhere areas, as long as it has an internet connection, you can still work, right? And you can work even high end jobs. So being able to say, having a more decentralized government where you can go ahead and kind of make your more kind of local changes, like an HOA, I think the pandemic has really kind of enabled that. And I think we're just going to see more of that, where it's like, I live in San Francisco. I'm experiencing hyperinflation. I'm going to move to Nebraska because I can still work there in a San Francisco-based company, right? But I don't want to live in this neighborhood. I want to live in the next neighborhood over because their laws suck. I really do think that's all kind of things that could definitely happen more so now than they could have, a year and a half ago.
Well, it all goes back to the sustainability of control I like to talk about, right? Like, the elite cannot maintain the control that they're trying to. And that's why you see people refusing to comply with mask mandates, lockdown mandates. It's going on around the world, and it's been going on for a couple years now, even with going back to the Yellow Vest protests, and then the Hong Kong protests. And the elite are losing their grip on us. And people are refusing to comply. And it's definitely heading towards... that's why I think there's going to be a real movement at some point to secede, because with Biden in the White House and Democrats controlling the Senate and the House, they're going to overstep their hand, overplay their hand, overstep their they're going to cross a line. That's the word phrase I'm looking for. They're going to cross a line, and people are going to be like, no, we're not going to do that. And if the feds get invasive and try and force something, that's when you're going to see a state try to secede, I think.
Yeah.
The other option is people are just say, no, we're not going to comply. And the feds say, okay, I guess we can't do anything. And they'll just ignore it.
Yeah, no. I think that's a good place to end on, honestly.
Yeah, for
solid.
sure. All right, I'm going to stop the recording. Hang on the line for a minute.
Yeah, sounds good.